it's Ashley with At Home with Ashley. The most popular project I've done lately is turning board games into books so that they can store vertically on a bookshelf and look amazing. My initial video was after I had only made one or two, and now that I've made a ton, I thought I would do an in-depth series of how I do each portion so I can tell you my best tips and tricks and I can show you exactly how to do it so you can make these too. Our first video is going to be how to dye the book box. So to make these, I like to use linen book boxes, and they're just wood boxes covered in linen fabric, and you can use dye to change the color of them. The game we're going to be making over today is called Bananagrams. If you like the color the way they are, you can totally skip this step though. These book boxes come in a set of three, a small, medium, and a large, and you're going to figure out which side works best for you. So you're going to take your game and you're going to see the smallest size box that you can fit it into. To prep the box, you need to take off the stickers on the back, and then you're going to wet the whole box down. So I like to have a cookie sheet ready for when I'm dyeing the book. I like to have a spoon ready so I can stir the dye bath. And I like to have an old towel ready that will catch the dye, and this will get dye on it, so don't use one that you want to reuse any other place. It's also good to have a paper towel ready because if there are like drips or spills or anything, it's nice to get that cleaned up right away. When you're doing this step, make sure you're wearing an apron. You do not want to dye your clothes. I have had the water boil and bubble up on my outfit and it ruined it. So just wear an apron. I also like to wear gloves, and I've tried like some like cute darker blue gloves, and the pink ones are better because I found the blue kind of transferred some of the dye from the gloves onto the box. So just make sure you wear gloves because you will get dye on your fingers and it'll come off after a few days, but they look bad in the meantime, so it's just best to protect your hands. For my dye bath, I like to use a small pot on the top of my stovetop, and I add about half a cup of water to the pot. I only like to do a little bit because you don't need a ton of water for this, and the more water you put in, the more wasted dye you're going to have. Once the water is in the pot, start your water boiling. Then you're going to take your RIT dye bottle and you're going to shake it really well. To dye the book boxes, I am using RIT dye all-purpose dye, and this works for cotton and linen, and these book boxes are linen, so that's perfect. After you shake the dye well, you're going to put 2 tablespoons of dye into the water. Stir the pan really well. You're going to add a tablespoon of salt and 1 drop of dish detergent. Stir the dye again, and then you can use a paper towel and kind of see if the color is good enough. If it's too light, add in more dye. If it's too dark, add in more water. Stir it again and get it boiling. We are going to use a foam brush to dye the book boxes. And if you are doing multiple book boxes with different color dye, make sure to switch out your foam brush because it's just really hard to totally get the dye out of the brush between coats. So while you're applying the dye, make sure to turn the water down to about medium because if it keeps boiling, it'll start bubbling over, and that's when you get spills on things you don't want them on. For these projects, I've dyed a lot of books and I've only used RIT dye on it. It's just a brand I like and I can easily buy at my craft store. So I won't be able to answer your questions if you have used other types of dye, but I do recommend the RIT dye because it works so well. The reason we added the salt was it allows the fibers to absorb the dye and it enhances the color. And then the dish detergent we added, it's to help promote level dyeing and it assists with the dye penetrating the fabric. So dye has a tendency to want to like be uneven and kind of stick to certain areas. All the things we're doing, like adding salt and dish detergent, stirring really well, shaking the bottle, all those things are to help combat the dye that can sometimes be uneven. Okay, so you're gonna just wanna keep going with your foam brush and you're gonna cover the front, the back, the spine, and then you're gonna do the edges, and even on the inside, there's a little bit of linen, and just get that all covered with the dye so it looks even and really professional. It takes about 10 minutes to dye this medium-sized box. It'll be a little bit shorter for the smaller box and a little bit longer for the bigger box because you have more area to cover. When the book is all dyed, you're going to put your book onto the towel and you're going to want to kind of lay it down. If you put it on the top or the bottom, the dye tends to pull towards one side and you get an ombre look. And then you also get some dye that's more concentrated like on the ends. So having it laid down kind of like a tent is the best way to do it that I've found. You're going to let the book dry for at least 2 hours. I am in dry Utah, and that's about how long it takes for me. If I need it to die faster, I can turn on a ceiling fan or I can like put it in front of the heater for my house that heats my house. So those both will speed it up, but you do not want to move on to the next step until the book box is totally dry. And you can just use your fingers to touch it and tell, because if you try to iron on the vinyl when it's wet, it won't stick. So I don't do anything else to set the dye because this isn't going through the wash. Like maybe if you dyed a t-shirt, it'd go through the wash. So you should do a few things to keep the dye from bleeding. But this one, it's just going to dry and sit on a shelf. I have tested it where I put some water, like I pretend to spill a cup of water on it, and none of the dye got on the table or anything else. I did like try to dry it with a towel, and that's when I got a little bit of dye on the towel. So just let it air dry if it happens to get spilled on while you're playing games. Okay, so next you need to dispose of the dye. And what I like to do is to throw it outside. It's snowy here, so I just put it on top of my snow pile. And I don't like to put it down my sink because I have a white sink and I've had bad experience with dyeing a tub in my past, and it was a nightmare to get out. So I prefer to just throw it outside. If you have a stainless steel sink though, it's probably fine to just go right down. Once my dye is thrown out, then I just rinse out my pot with cold water and that kind of cools down the pot. And then I throw it in the dishwasher. I've had zero problems of the dye dyeing my pan, so that's really nice. Then I use a paper towel to clean up any spills that might have happened on my stovetop, or if the water splashed, the dye water splashed anywhere, I clean it up pretty quick. And I've been slower on this and I have like some dye spots on my stove, but I painted my stove, so that's why they don't come clean. So as the book box dries, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than when you first dye it. And if it dries light enough that you're like, I don't like this color anymore, you can repeat these steps. You can re-dye it. I've even ironed on the vinyl and been like, this color is too light, and gone back and dyed it with the vinyl on, and it was totally fine. So there's some room for error if you don't get the color quite right the first time. Okay, so now that everything is cleaned up, you are done with this step, and that is how you dye your book boxes. I wanted to show you a video of how the book box turned out. It's not perfectly even though I tried my best. But once you put the names on the cover, it'll look amazing. I also want to show you a bunch of the books I have dyed and the dye I used with them, so you can kind of see how I water it down to get that nice pastel look. Please join me on the next video in this series where I'm going to show you how I designed the book boxes. In the description, I'm going to have links to everything I used today, as well as the blog post that has more details, and it also has free downloads for the game board, spine, and cover that we're going to use in the upcoming steps. If you have questions, please put it in the comments. If it's for any part of this series, let me know because I can answer them in the upcoming videos. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and please make sure you're subscribed.